A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome back to films I should have talked about years ago. And so, I've talked about Darkman a little while ago. Now it's time that we get to the sequels. Yeah, it seems that every single time that a film goes big on the big screen, scores big in the box office, and in the world of criticism, there's always the chance that sequels are bound to show up. In this case, Darkman did get a few sequels over a 14-year period, beginning in 1999 with Darkman 2, The Return of Durant. Yeah, for the record, the character Robert G. Durant, an accomplice to Strack, who was supposedly the main bad guy from the first film, apparently survived the helicopter crash that happened when Darkman himself was basically swinging around on ropes, close down to the road, and basically in the crossfire of a grenade launcher. Of course, the same old Peyton Westlake that we've known from the first film, who back then was played by Liam Neeson, was able to swiftly cause Robert's death by helicopter crash. Apparently, he actually survived the blast. And let's not forget one major detail here. Liam Neeson actually could not come through with the sequels, so he could not play Peyton Westlake. Instead, Darkman 2 simply introduces Arnold Vosloo. That's right, Imhotep from The Mummy. This was basically the same exact time that The Mummy was released, so he's pretty much had a busy year. But I will say that Vosloo could be arguably comparable to what Neeson's performance was back in the first film. But the thing is, while Neeson has been replaced by Vosloo for the role of Westlake, it turns out they were still able to get the same actor for Durant himself. It basically comes as an awakening from a coma. That's apparently how Durant is able to come back from the dead. He apparently survived the blast, but was put into a coma for a while, and he eventually awakens. He would then continue his pursuit of becoming a criminal empire overlord, possibly of the century, or even worse. But no matter which way you look at it, Durant's back, and he's here to cause chaos. Or so he thinks. Because Westlake himself, the one and only Darkman, who still does have some grievous wounds on him that had to be covered up by bandages at all times. Otherwise, those famous trigger words, freak, will be cast all over him, causing him to remember the traumatic life experiences of how he was back in his old lab before it was blown up. And he had been genetically altered to become the one and only Darkman. Here in the sequel, however, Westlake does continue his research. He continues trying to find ways on how to allow his special type of material needed to create his iconic masks. Masks, of course, that are made specifically to disguise himself as any known criminal in the city. Unfortunately, though, just as we've seen with the first movie, these microorganisms that have to be bonded together only last for 99 minutes every time. So every time that Dr. Westlake ends up going out on a certain mission, a mission of vengeance, revenge against the criminal empire that brought him down, he basically only has 99 minutes before the sunlight kills it off and melts away this new material. So what he's trying to do here is he's trying to accomplish a limit higher than 99 minutes. But it pretty much seems that even after all these years of research and numerous attempts, experiments and whatnot, he still can't bring himself up to accomplish any of this. As for Durant, he basically has a new plan set in motion. He liberates a scientist from a prison And he uses this scientist to try to convince them that they are in fact going to be looking for a special type of weapon that they found out that he had actually invented himself. So the scientist actually does help Durant with this weapon itself. And this weapon is in fact known to decimate through any kind of solid material in a rather explosive manner. These weapons are basically like what you might expect from a railgun, but are in fact just things that shoot out beams that cause anything to explode. So, you might think it's pretty generic, but that's only because every movie's got to have a rather convincing piece of storyline to allow audiences to be drawn inwards, and hopefully we will each be reminded on how significant that probably is. In this particular case though, just the fact that Durant actually survived the helicopter crash rather than dying, Strack basically fell down a pretty big height, so how he died while Durant apparently lived doesn't really make a lot of sense. Because if anything, Strack could have fallen onto a soft object at the bottom of the building under construction that he fought Darkman at in the climax of the first film, and he definitely would have survived, most likely. That would have been a bit more believable compared to somebody being put in a coma and remaining completely intact from head to toe from a helicopter crash. That thing exploded, ablaze. So, it makes zero sense at this point. The return of Strack probably could have been a bit more significant and definitely more believable in this case. Also, if Vosloo was not in this film, if they just brought back Neeson, he definitely pulled off the role well. He certainly had the face of a scientist, much like what we've seen with the likes of, let's just say, Harold Ramis as Dr. Spangler from Ghostbusters. Pretty much every actor has their own iconic role, and every single face should be chosen carefully and wisely to ensure that the performance is maximized, but there's also the highest possible success, both critically and financially. In this case, Darkman 2 is just simply a sequel. So I probably can't talk a whole lot about this, but in case you're not familiar with it, yes, Durant finally gets what's coming to him. For real this time. The first time that Darkman dealt with him was by crashing a helicopter, and that was basically how they parted ways until Durant basically awakened. And how Darkman puts him out for good? Well, another explosion. This time it's based on a heavily modified limousine that Durant himself requested to be modified specifically for him and his many usages. He wanted it to be bulletproof, fast, and powerful by all means. Completely immune to any possible thing that any other criminal empire could toss at him. It could also be possible to even take out the likes of Darkman himself. However though, Darkman, with his clever, cunning strategy and his impressive planning, he is able to easily take out Durant for good by blowing up the car from the inside out. But not before Robert basically curses him once and for all. So in the end, Darkman basically survives yet again. And wouldn't you know that they actually made a third movie in 2004? 5 years after the second, 14 years after the first. So there's definitely a big gap between these films in general. Probably too big of a gap, but in case you're wanting to know how I feel about Darkman 3, or Darkman Die, as it's apparently called, from 2004, well, let's just say that it's inconclusive. I can't possibly say anything else about this compared to anything else I've already mentioned about the Darkman series as is. The first film was really good. The second one is just meh on that part. More specifically, the score I would give to this one, in all curiosity's sakes, for all of you, would probably have to be a 6.2 out of 10.1. So certainly not that good of a film. and I wouldn't probably recommend it for everybody out there unless you're willing to dish out a few dollars to rent it on YouTube, as I did so. So I guess with that in mind, there's just not a whole lot more that I could say about this, so we'll pretty much just leave it as it is. A sequel to Darkman. Every franchise seems to have sequels in them at this point. It's kind of getting real. But please make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side if you'd like to see more.